All right, I'm sitting down here to get ready to play a game called the Fantasy Trip Melee. This is a game that came out in 1977. It was followed up by a game called the Fantasy Trip Wizard, and then shortly after that by a third game called Fantasy Trip in the Labyrinth. Melee, as well as Wizard, are skirmish games. They're kind of set up to the kind of default idea would be to have two characters squaring off in an arena, or perhaps two small groups squaring off in an arena and having combat. Melee, the combat is predominantly with various types of hand weapons and some missile weapons. Wizard adds some combat magic into the mix. And then finally, when Steve Jackson came out with In the Labyrinth, those elements were added to a more full blown fantasy role playing game. Um, so I'm starting on with some small steps here, and I'm going to play Melee, not with the magic. I'm going to leave Wizard aside for a second, and I'm going to be playing a adventure called Death Test. And Death Test is a kind of programmed adventure that can be played solo, which is the way that I will be playing it. Um, the basic idea of Death Test is that there's this fellow who is named the Thors, who is building up his militia. And in order to do so, he is throwing some people into his labyrinth to see if they have what it takes. Um, to give you full disclosure, I've played a little bit of Death Test, and I've put together a party of four characters, and I started them out at the basic level, and the game does suggest that you might want to actually have slightly more experienced characters. It suggests maybe putting characters in the arena, having them fight some battles. There's an experience advancement system, and you can kind of build up the characters a little bit that way. So I've done a little bit of Death Test. It ends up being pretty brutal, even for a group of four characters. If they're at the basic level, it is a pretty deadly test for them. So I went back to the drawing board slightly and gave myself a little bit of a liberty to make those characters a little bit more experienced, which makes them slightly more formidable as fighters. Um, so I'll show those to you in 1 second. I do want to just kind of show you that this here is from the rule book of Melee. It's a character sheet, and you can see that it's not very extensive. You basically have two main statistics: strength, which dictates what kinds of weapons you can use, and also the number of your strength becomes your hit points. You have dexterity, which governs your chances to hit, and in some cases can impact with missile weapons. If you can fire the missile weapon twice in a round, you'll see that there's a base dexterity, but then the dexterity can get adjusted downward. So with Ragnar the Impetuous, starts with 13. He's wearing leather armor, which is going to help him absorb 2 hits from an attack, but that also drops his dexterity down to 11, which is also going to make it more difficult for him to hit people. And then he also has this large shield, and this will allow him to absorb 2 more hits if they're coming from a front facing hex. And that drops him down to a 10. And the game is played on a hex grid battle map. And so I'm using a platform called Owlbear Rodeo, and I've got my four characters here. The basic arena, or in the case of Death Test room, is a 15 by 8 grid room with these hexagonal grids with a door in the upper right corner and a door in the lower left corner. And so I've indicated those with these little yellow post-it notes. And the idea is that when they step into a room, they would be here in these four basic hexes. Um, the game is deceptively simple because it's not really all that simple, despite what this character sheet looks like. And despite the fact that the Melee rules are 25 pages, those rules are written in a very compact, efficient, direct manner. They're laid out very logically. There's a whole lot to really like about this game. And some people might look at the character sheet and say, oh, there can't be much to it. But everything really has been thought out pretty well. You're reading the rule book along, you have questions, and typically those questions get answered in the rules. And there's not a whole lot of fluff in the rules. I mean, it gets right down to business and kind of lays things out. And the game is quite challenging to run because of all of the possibilities that exist for characters, and there are lots of things to kind of keep track of on the battlefield. So to my characters, I have four characters who are going to be going into the labyrinth. These are basically the same characters I originally played with at the intro level, but I've kind of beefed them up a little bit. So we have Brunhilde the Basher. I've highlighted the items that would normally be activated with a character. There are rules about having weapons ready, and if you don't have a weapon ready or need to switch between weapons in a combat situation, that becomes a factor. So the idea here is that in the case of Brunhilde, she would normally be going into the room with a morning star at the ready, wearing leather armor and a small shield. And uh, normally, you start off with an 8 strength and 8 dexterity. I have IQ down here. I don't know that that's going to come into play. That's really more for wizard, but I just went on and threw the IQ in there as well. But it then gives you 8 additional points, which you can distribute between strength, dexterity, and if you were playing wizard, you could put some of those points in the IQ, which would govern spell ability and resistance to some spells. So what I did though is added 3 more to that. So what you're going to see with all these characters is that when you add up the strength and dexterity numbers, they're going to come up with 27. And we have Brunhilde with a 12 adjusted dexterity because of the leather armor. The small shield, which can only absorb 1 hit per attack to the front or from the front, does not lead to a dexterity modifier. And with the leather armor, normally your movement allowance, this MA number here, is 10, but with leather, that drops down to 8. So here we got Brunhilde with a morning star, and the morning star can do some serious damage if you roll well. I mean, you can see like she has essentially 13 hit points, and if she got hit by a morning star and it was maxed out and she couldn't, and let's say she wasn't wearing the leather or didn't have the small shield, that would take her down to 0 in a single blow. I mean, it ends up in some cases being a pretty deadly game. All right, so we got Goreth the Goliath. You see again, strength and dexterity add up to 27. He has leather armor, which takes the dexterity down to a 13, and the large shield which can absorb 2 hits per attack, but it comes at a price of taking that dexterity down another number, which is going to impact Gorith's chances to hit. And again, leather armor, we get a movement allowance of 8. Broadsword, which is what he will normally be using with his shield. The broadsword does 2 dice of damage. Then we have Slykin the Sneak, who is set up with a high dexterity, um, and this and he wears cloth armor. Is mainly looking to use the horse bow, and with that dexterity level, he can fire off 2 shots of the horse bow per turn. Okay. But obviously his armor, and he doesn't have much in terms of strength, so his hit points are not great. So he's going to have to be uh, really trying to use his movement, which is up at 9 because the cloth only takes it down 1. He's not looking to engage in hand to hand combat or melee combat, but wants to stay distant and rely on his bow. And then Vivavain the Violent, you see here, has a dexterity of 14, but is also wearing leather armor. And Vivavain is looking to use the halberd. It's a pole weapon, and in the preliminary scenarios that I was running through, the pole weapons were really interesting. They can be used for charging attacks or to defend against enemies that are coming in at you, and they also have a little reach, so an enemy doesn't have to be just in a adjoining hex, but they can be 2 hexes away, and you can still jab at them with the halberd. All right, and then going to the death test that we are putting these characters into. There are some special rules and suggestions that Death Test makes. The idea, we get reported to us by the officer in charge that the Thors who's putting us into this labyrinth has eyes everywhere. We don't need to search for secret doors. It's a test of skill and bravery, not eyesight. And the rooms are separated by these curtains of darkness rather than doors. And I haven't run into this yet, but some of the curtains of darkness may be false curtains that you may try to go through one and find out that there's still simply a stone wall behind there. Okay. And you have to look at the instructions room by room to see like where are those curtains of darkness and whether you're allowed to go through them or not. Okay. So let's see if there's any. Right here, they have the suggestions, right, and about characters. The labyrinth is tough. It says, actually, and I'm going to add a rule here because no doubt these characters are going to sustain damage, and I don't think there are a lot of provisions, if any, in the death test to heal characters, and that would make it even more brutal. And I've found out that it's you have to kind of keep moving forward. If you try to move backwards, at least in one instance, there was no possibility that I would just kind of get looped around and be at the same place and had to kind of move forward. So I'm going to have a rule that when the characters leave a room for the first time, going through another door, I'm going to roll 1d4, and that will represent whatever number is going to represent some healing potions that can be used by characters, and we'll see how that goes in terms of the ability to kind of keep the play moving. Because as it says here, all combat in the death test is considered one fight. So even though you're actually going to be in a lot of different battles, it's still one fight, and so you've got to keep on trudging forward. Okay. Um, so, and it suggests that you do some mapping and some record keeping. And with that in mind, I'll just reveal what I have in front of me. I've got a pad of grid paper that I'll be using to map. So I'm using that. I've got some paper here to keep track of the characters. One of the things that I have found with the solo play, and one of the real values of it, is you really gotta keep track of a lot of stuff that's going on. If we get into a 4-on-4 combat, which would be pretty typical in a role playing game, if you're playing solo, you are now kind of having to keep track of 8 characters. Whereas if you were a player, it's mainly your character and how they interact with the other people in the combat. And if you were the DM, you would have your 4 NPCs, perhaps, that you were really having to keep track of, but you would be able to rely heavily on the players to kind of keep track of their own characters. So anyway, I'm going to be active on the record keeping. I've got my characters here with their important statistics, so I can have those for reference. I have the rule book, and then I also have some little post-it notes so that when we encounter uh, combatants, I can kind of quickly sketch things down. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of quickly pass through the rest of this, except to say that there are rules about playing the monsters, and it tries to economize here, just saying, okay, if you encounter monsters and foes, they're going to fight to the death. They will never run unless there's some specific instruction, and that they use basic tactics. They will try to run at you and try to kill you, right? Human and humanoid foes will try to close with you unless their main weapon is a missile weapon, in which case they will try to stand off and fire. But if they have a handheld weapon, they're going to try to run at you and hit you. So that's the basic idea of that. Okay, so let's just go on and head into the labyrinth. As I say, I've already played out a little bit of this, so this will move us along pretty quickly. So it says, number one, your party goes. Okay, so we're standing at a door. Okay, and basically we are kind of ushered in there, our characters, and we are at the door to enter this labyrinth for the death test. And it tells us, with number one, your party goes through the door and goes west. You come to a curtain and step through, and then we go to 48. And so it's like a choose your own adventure type scenario, where we go to 48, and then it says we are in the red room. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping track of things here. So we were at number one, and we went in, and then this took us to 48, which is the red room. There is a large chest in the exact center of the room. You may open it and go to 93, or you can go out the west door, 16. The east door is now locked, right? So there's only one way out of this room, that east exit. If we had like second thoughts about whether we even wanted to do the death test now, that's kind of closed off to us. Now, I'll just kind of, this little situation is one that was curious, and I have played through this. And what I did is I went to 93. It says the chest is in the middle of the room. Position your party in the room. At least one person has to be next to the chest to open it. Go to 33. If you change your mind about opening the chest, go back to 48. When I read this, I was like, oh, that's kind of wicked, right? That it gives us a second option. Like, do you really want to open the chest? And I opted to not open the chest. So, and I'm just going to go on and do that as well here. Just take us back to 48. I did subsequently, out of curiosity, look, and I think that this choice was a good idea, because what happens with that chest is it is filled with spiders. There's kind of small spiders, but they kind of jump on everybody, and you have this kind of encounter with the spiders trying to kind of kill them. But there are a lot of them. There are 12 of them, and they're all over you. And think that there is some gold in the chest, but to my view, it is not really important. I think the important thing for my group is to like get through the labyrinth in one piece. So we're going to go out the west door, and this will take us to room 16. You are facing west. Okay, so um, um, we're facing west. You can walk down a corridor and come to a four-way. Okay, so we come to the four-way intersection. We can go north to 86. We can go south to 19, or we can continue west to 144. Well, and since we were going west, maybe we will change our direction here. And let's go north to 86 and see where that takes us. Go down here, 86. You are facing west, and this is kind of curious, and I found this in a number of cases where okay, we took the north one, but obviously there was a kind of looping or turning that happened, and we are now in front of a curtain, and we can go through, in which case we would go to 3, or we can go back and go to 111. And that's curious, right? Because it's like, well, what 111? Where? I mean, that's on my record. There's not a 111 room or anything like that. So, do these corridors shift, or do you kind of go down one, and if you go back it, you may actually end, oddly enough, at a different place. But I think here, I don't think we want to go back. So I think we will go through, and this will take us to room number 3. Here we go. We are in the indigo room. There are 2 orcs there at the X's. So this right here is the standard battle map. As I say, 15 by 8, roughly speaking. And you always have this one entrance over here. You'll see if you can make out the lighter lines here. And there's another entrance here. And we have 2 orcs that are in the center of the room. These black hexes then are, it doesn't necessarily specify what they are, but they are obstacles. They could be pillars, they could be stalactites or something else, but you cannot fire through them, and you cannot walk through them. You have to walk around them and fire.